about women in environmental economics for development. You can see on this opening slide how to find more information on us through the website or social media or through our email contact there. And yes, on this next slide, then you can learn a little bit more about us. WinEED stands for Women in Environmental Economics for Development. We are a collaborative under the Environment for Development Initiative, and our primary goal is to build a pipeline and enhance the capacity of women economists in the Global South to take on research leadership in environmental economics at the interface with development and poverty alleviation. We have a secondary objective of creating capacity and promoting cutting-edge gender research throughout the EFD research portfolio, and this seminar series has really been focused on moving forward that objective of showcasing high-quality gender analysis and research and encouraging adoption of that across EFD research. So I want to move on to introducing today's seminar. We've been holding seminars for those of you who have been joining us at the intersection of gender and energy research in collaboration with SETI, the Sustainable Energy Transitions Initiative. And we're happy today to have Camille Belmin as our speaker on how modern energy access could be associated with fertility decline. So Camille Belmin is a PhD candidate at Humboldt University in Berlin. Her research focuses on this issue of the intersection and linkages between access to energy and the fertility transition in low-income countries, and the implications for sustainable development policies. Her work lies at the intersection of the sociology of energy, demography, and social metabolism. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her talk. Because we're running a webinar today, all of your videos should be off, and we ask that you keep yourself muted. During Camille's talk, please add your questions into the Q&A box. So you'll be able to put them either in Q&A or in the chat, but you'll help us by adding all your questions into the Q&A box and put them in as we go along. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions and thoughts for Camille. And then at the end of her talk, she'll have about 30 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and we'll get to all of your questions at that point, running through the ones that you've posted in the Q&A box. So Camille, Stephanie, Rebecca, if there's nothing else that I need to say, I'm going to turn it over to Camille, mute myself, and let her share her screen and share her research with us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. This one. Yeah, you should be able to see it, right?
Yes.
No. Great. Yeah, thanks a lot, Erin, Rebecca, Stephanie, for inviting me today. It's my great honor to talk at the WinEED seminar. Yeah, and I'm really happy to present my PhD research on modern energy and fertility. What I'm going to present today is a common joint work with my colleagues, Roman Hoffman, Peter Paul Bischler, and Helge Weiss. So, although most of you must already be familiar with this definition, reproductive rights are the rights of individual to decide whether to reproduce and to have reproductive health. It's a human right since 1968, but today globally there is 45% of women who lack of decision-making power regarding their reproductive rights and their reproductive health. And what enables actually women to have more controls over their reproductive choices? So I'm going to show you step by step small conceptual figures that we've done based on the literature and also our own conceptualization. So according to us and the literature, reproductive choice is composed of different things that enable reproductive choice. A first important component is power, so having enough empowerment to make the reproductive choice. And what enables this empowerment? Education might enable more empowerment and more power over reproductive choice, but also labor market participation for women, because that allows more financial autonomy. A second component is access to information. So here, information can lead women to have more information on reproductive health. And here, the use of modern media, like TV, radio, or mobile phone, can bring that source of information. And also, such modern media can also communicate alternative fertility norms, which would lead to more reproductive choice. A third component is what I call freedom from material constraints. So here I talk specifically of the reduced need for child labor. So in some population, because there's many household work, child labor is a valuable, child are valuable in household production. Another aspect is child mortality. So family can want to have more children to reach the same desired fertility when there is high child mortality, because they want to reach the desired fertility. But if there is higher child mortality, then they'll have to compensate in a way for that. So those three components, in our view, allow women to make better reproductive choices. And here, what's the relationship of modern energy to these three different components? First of all, access to electricity in particular can lead to access to modern media and therefore more information. The second aspect is that access to clean cooking fuel will lead to less indoor pollution and therefore drastically reduce child mortality. And the third aspect is that access to electricity and access to modern cooking fuels can lead to less time spent on housework. And this work is generally done by women and children in many populations. So less time spent on housework can lead to many results, but some of them is that there will be more time for education and for labor market participation, which then will lead to more empowerment and reproductive choice. So here I'm talking about reproductive choice, but now I'm going to talk about fertility. So what's the relationship between the two? So the more women have the better reproductive choice women have, the lower children they will have. So as the executive director of the UN Population Fund said, Natalia Kanem, where people are able to make decisions for themselves, they tend to choose smaller families. Where choices are constrained, they tend to have families that are either very large or very small, sometimes with no children at all. So this leads me to my research question. Does access to modern energy, namely access to electricity and access to modern cooking fuel, affects the average children born to a woman? And what moderates the strength of this relationship? So before continuing, I'm just going to define what I call modern cooking fuels. So here it will be everything that doesn't come from traditional biomass. So it will be LPG, electricity, gas, but not traditional biomass or charcoal. So there has already been research on energy and fertility, but it's very few papers as compared as for example, studies on the effect of education on fertility. There's about, I would say, less than 10 studies that looked at that. And those studies are the country level, so they focus on one country, so that allows to do some other methods but yeah, often it's only at the country level. And those studies also focus on electrification or on the effect of wood scarcity, but the effect of modern cooking fuel on fertility has, to our knowledge, not been looked upon. So how did we do to investigate this relationship? So what we wanted to do is to show, to bring evidence of this relationship for the largest number of countries as possible. So we used the demographic and health survey data because they are harmonized over time and they're nationally and subnationally representative. So what we did is we combined 254 DHS data and we aggregated them at the subnational level. So the DHS, they're microdata, and so we aggregated those data at the subnational level. And this resulted in a panel data of 43 countries covering 40% of the world population, 304 districts, so subnational regions, and 17 years from 1990 to 2015. Here is a small representation of the variables we used. So as a fertility indicator, we use the total fertility rate. So it can be represented as the average number of children per woman, and it's independent of the age structure of the population. So you can compare the fertility of two populations that have different age structure with the TFR. The energy variables, we use 3 indicators. The first is the percentage of women having access to electricity. Then the percentage of women having access to modern cooking fuels, or the percentage of women having access to both at the same time. And then we choose a set of variables that can affect both fertility and energy, and that could come from the relationship in a statistical analysis. So we controlled for the level of education, the percentage of urban household in a region, the national GDP per capita. Also, we used the indicator of conflict in the country. And we also control for age at marriage as a proxy for cultural factors. And there, we also sort of including other factors like labor market participation or child mortality, but we thought that there would be more intermediate variables than controls. This is why we didn't include them in the control sets. As a estimation, we use the fixed effects estimation. So here you can see the formula. So the total fertility rate in one region at one time point would be equal to the energy coefficient times the energy indicator plus the a set of control variables and their coefficients. And of course, region fixed effects and time fixed effects. In order to further explore the relationship between energy and fertility, we did an interaction analysis. So here, the coefficient for energy is made dependent on the moderating variables. So yeah, here the effect of energy on fertility would be moderated by, for example, the level of fertility, the initial level of fertility in the region. And as I will show later what comes out of this. So before jumping into the estimation, a quick look into the raw data and how they look like. So on this graph, you can see the total fertility rate of a region per electricity access quartile on the left and per modern cooking fuel access quartile on the right. So you can see that the average fertility rate tends to be smaller in in quartiles where electricity access and where modern cooking fuel access is relatively higher. So this gives us a hint of why we look for this relationship more deeply, because there's obviously a relationship, but we want to see if this is not confounded by other factors. So the first result that we find is that controlling for other factors, access to modern energy, has a negative effect on fertility with p-value lower than 5%. Here you can see the regression table. So on the top, you have the different energy indicators, and on the bottom, you have the control variables. And the 4 different columns represent each of the model with different energy indicators. So first, we see that for all energy indicators, the effect is negative. So between minus 0.012 to minus 0.017. And the second thing that I want to highlight is the effect of education on fertility. So as I said before, the education and fertility relationship is well studied, and it's well known that the more the education, the less the fertility will be in a region. And we see that these are 2 very strong effects on fertility. The second result is that the higher the fertility in a region, the stronger the impact of access to modern energy on fertility will be. So what does that mean more specifically? So this is the result from the interaction analysis. And here on those 2 figures, you can see the predicted effect on fertility in function of the baseline level of fertility in a region. On the left, you have electricity access, and on the right, you have modern cooking fuel access. You can see that the more the fertility, so the higher the fertility initially in a region will be, the more negative will be the effect of energy on fertility. So in other terms, when you are in a high fertility region, the effect of energy, of having more energy on fertility will be stronger. This result can also be represented on the map, as we did here. So on this map is represented the marginal effect of access to modern energy on fertility in different countries. And here, for most of the countries, are only represented the average for the whole country, but in reality, our model performs at the subnational level. So that's why we have the inset for Nigeria here. So basically in countries that started with high fertility, the effect of energy on fertility will be higher. And even within a country, you'll have this heterogeneity. For example, here in Nigeria, you see that where there is the light green area is where is the most populated and urban area. So, and in such area, fertility is usually lower than in other more rural areas. A third result that came out from our study is that the higher the level of education in a region, the stronger the impact of access to modern energy on fertility will be. This again comes from our interaction analysis. So this is what you can see again on this graph. This is again the predicted effect on fertility of the 2 energy indicators on left and right in function of the baseline level of education in a region. So what does it mean? Essentially, when a region is relatively, where women are relatively better educated, the effect of bringing more access to modern energy on fertility will be. And so, of course, it's difficult to really give a direct interpretation to this, but then we can make some hypotheses. For example, this could be due to the fact that where women are more educated, they are maybe more able to better use the energy technologies, or to also better be able um, to want to engage more with them, for example, with access to modern cooking fuels. And last and fourth results that came out from our study is that projected to the future scenarios that combine universal access to electricity and enhanced education can reduce total fertility rate by 23%. So here what we did is to make a very simple simulation at the country level. And in this simulation, we project fertility in the future, so to 2040, based on scenarios that combine both access to energy and also education. We focused here on education and energy because they are two apparently strong drivers of fertility decline, and we held all other factors constant. In gray, you have the baseline scenarios where the scenarios, so the education trends in countries will follow past historical trends, and the same for access to electricity. In purple, you have a continuation of past educational trends, but you have all countries that reach 100% access to electricity by 2040. And in orange, you have a scenarios where both education where education will follow an improved trend. So as compared as the past trends, you will have one standard deviation additionally in percentage increase, and you will reach universal access to electricity by 2014. So here we see that for the more optimistic scenario where universal access is reached and where education improves relatively better, you'll have about 23% decrease in fertility. No, sorry, the difference in the fertility decline will be 23% as compared as the baseline scenarios. And again, here you have heterogeneity between the countries. This is why this is because we used the fact that the effect of energy on fertility is stronger in countries that have initially a high fertility. So that brings me to the discussion. But before jumping into the implication, I want to acknowledge some limitation from this work. So first of all, energy access is a very complex phenomenon, and it's more complex than a binary measure that we have here. Here we have, we proxy energy access by electricity access. So it means whether a household has a connection or not. But in reality, the quality of the connection is very important. The frequency of blackouts is very important to measure how good will be the energy service delivered. Another thing is that more recently there has been strong improvements in off-grid solar device. So it's some new technologies that allow a household to have access to the energy service without being connected to the grid. And this is particularly important in a country like Ethiopia or Kenya or Uganda. And this would be very interesting to study the effect of having such device on well-being and also reproductive choices. A second very important limitation is that we use a fixed effect estimation. So this remove a time invariant and observed factors. But this estimation strategy doesn't allow to make sure that the variation in modern energy access is purely exogenous. However, our results mirror previous findings on electricity and fertility. So I'm thinking of 3 studies in particular that use instrumental variables in single countries. So at the more fine level, it's more durable to find instrumental variables that allow that allow to make sure we have a purely exogenous variation in electricity access. But the scale of our study is, of course, in our view, it was not durable to find such IVs. So regarding the implication for sustainable development, so if energy access leads to fertility decline, it's probably a sign that energy excess enables better reproductive choice. And this would mean that this would be possible this brings avenue to simultaneously achieve different SDGs like good health and well-being, gender equality that has a specific target on reproductive rights, and affordable and clean energy. A second important thing that in our view is largely overlooked but could be very important is that if energy excess leads to fertility decline and a smaller population, then this would also lead to smaller energy demands. There is a strand of research that looks at the effects of alleviating energy poverty on energy demand and CO2 emissions. So these studies often say that to tackle extreme energy poverty, you don't need much energy and CO2 emissions, and also you don't need much money at all, as compared as what is what they find is that the amount of energy and CO2 emission necessary to tackle extreme energy poverty is very insignificant as compared as rich countries' emissions. But in order to get to relatively higher standards of living, then this amount increases, so energy demand increases naturally. But my point is that such studies often, or even always, take energy access scenarios, and then they will take a scenario of population growth for the UN, from the UN most often, that is exogenous. So it means that it's disconnected from energy access. And then from those 2 scenarios, they will estimate future energy demand. But here, in our research, we found that energy access might actually lead to a smaller population growth. And therefore, if this would be taken into account in those models, then you would find a smaller future energy demand. So in a way, we think that the energy demand and CO2 demand from poverty alleviation is probably overestimated in those models. So that would be an important thing to take into account in future research, to take this relationship into account to more accurately estimate what is really needed to tackle energy poverty. So to say this once more, in addition to having positive effects for well-being, health, and gender equality, access to modern energy may also have unexpected climate mitigation co-benefits. And I'm done, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Camille. Perfect timing. And we have a few questions coming in. So let's go to those. The first couple I want to pose to you are about causal identification, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I think they both came in before your slide on limitation. So just to give you a little bit of context there, because you were addressing that there. Jimena Rico asked if you tested for parallel trends, for the parallel trends assumption.
So I assume that you mean that if I control for trends that could affect the relationship, but can you be more specific?
Jimena, I think I've given you the right to unmute yourself if you would like to be more specific.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And there are some papers, I can send you some, but you can see the graphs. You can only, let's say, graph your outcome before the treatment in both your control and treatment group and see whether they are following the same trends before your treatment year. And there is also another running, you could also run regressions using event study design. So I am asking because I have also a paper with fixed effects, and that's something that has been asked before by many researchers. So
Yeah.
that's why I was curious.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm very happy if you can send me those paper that I can look into. Yeah, the causal identification, of course, is always an issue, and in this paper we don't claim to identify causal effects because our identification strategy doesn't allow. So yeah, regarding simultaneity, we also rerun our results with lagged explanatory variables. So that's one aspect. And yeah, for the remaining, we try to control for a set of controls that we think cover a realistically yeah, good range of variants that could confound the relationship. But of course, we cannot really claim that we identify causal effects. Yeah, just to complete, we more see our study as complementary as other studies that have looked into the causal effects. And yeah, we see it as a study that brings evidence for many countries of this potential causal relationship without really going as far as that.
Great, thank you. So that answers Mark Julin's question, which is whether a causal interpretation is warranted. He's concerned about other time-varying omitted variables like access to contraceptives, urbanization rates,
Yeah.
let's see, occupation or profession. So I'll let you comment on any of those, how you selected your covariates, and while I scroll down to find more questions for you. So go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, these are really good questions. So regarding access to contraception, of course, yeah, we thought about this, but in the end, we more saw it as a dependent variable than an explanatory variable. This is why we didn't include this in our set of controls. Regarding occupation, so actually initially it was included because we thought this would necessarily be correlated with both fertility and access to energy. But yeah, after thinking again, we found that we thought that so labor market participation would be more of an intermediate variable than a control variable. So in a way, more energy access would allow better access to labor market, which would in turn lead to lower fertility. So, but if you have such pattern, then you shouldn't control for labor market participation for those intermediate variables. But of course, as we are in social science, everything is intertwined. So we can never know really which one comes first. And we also, what we also did is to rerun our results with different sets of controls that we potentially think are intermediate as control, to see if that really affects our results. And we find that in all cases, the energy coefficient, they remain negative, and also with p-value below 5%. Yeah, and there was a third one, but
Urbanization.
Urbanization. Yeah, we control for urbanization in a region, because we think that affects both energy access and also potentially fertility.
Okay, I'll move us on to our next question, which is that given that you have invested so much in merging lots of data sets, have you considered looking at other outcomes related to energy access? That is, other outcomes in addition to fertility?
Yeah. We have indeed spent a lot of time doing that. And what is really nice is that everything is reproducible, and it's actually already available on the Git, but we'll wait a bit for publication to really spread that. And so looking into other effects of energy access from the DHS, yes, that would be what could we look into. Yeah, the DHS is really a mine of a lot of variables. I didn't directly think of what to look with my data set, but yeah, it's quite there will definitely be other pathway to go into that. Another thing that we wanted to do is to maybe link this data set with gridded environmental data sets that will allow to look at the effect of environmental change on fertility. But this is more of a long-term project. Yeah.
Great. So lots of good ideas. I should say that question was from Subrendu, and he also commented earlier that the group at Duke, the SETI group, would be very interested in seeing your paper and sort of your theory of change underlying this work. So maybe you can follow up with him and he'll give you ideas of other outcomes to look at.
Yeah, I would love to have more ideas from you.
Okay. All right. So next question in the Q&A. I am curious if there is any evidence from natural science or the health literature that shows the relationship between fertility and energy access. In other words, is there literature in those other domains that shows the mechanism linking energy access and fertility?
Okay. Yeah, so this is honestly a very new field. So there is some literature, and it doesn't really come from the natural science. I would say it more comes from social science and economics. And regarding the mechanisms, what I presented at the beginning sort of summarizes what we found in the literature. So there's a lot of different channels that operate at different time scales. So that's quite a complex transition, I think. But I would say that one important mechanism is that more access to modern energy leads to less time spent on housework. And this is, for some reason, something that people don't necessarily think about. And more time for women means a lot of time to dedicate to other things. And this can be education, and this can be labor market participation. But in general, it contributes to well-being, to having less things to do in the household. So this time reduction is one mechanism, I would say. And yeah, as I said, more information on reproductive health and reduction in child mortality and improvement in women's health is also one.
So maybe I'll ask a follow-up to that. You presented results with different measures of energy access. So access to modern cooking fuels, access to electricity. And I wondered if you had hypotheses about which one of those you think would have a larger effect, because obviously they could operate through different mechanisms, right? So access to media is going to come through electricity, but not modern cooking fuels, for example. So any comments on that?
Yeah. So we actually compare the standardized coefficients. So here what I showed was not, there was not standardized. So you can't really compare them, but we found that the effect of modern cooking fuel on fertility was higher than the effect of electricity on fertility. But the thing is, we always have to think that the measure of electricity is not very good, because well, it's a proxy for your energy access through electricity, but in many cases, electricity access refers more to can have a bad connection or a lot of blackouts, and it doesn't say how much you use energy as well. Whereas I think the measure of modern cooking fuel access is it originally comes from the question, what is your main type of cooking fuel? And the woman answers it's LPG or it's firewood. And here you really know that this is what the woman uses. So I think, so we find that the effect of modern cooking fuel on fertility is higher than the effect of electricity. But I cannot conclude that really the effect of modern energy, modern cooking fuel is higher than the effect of having a good electricity service, if that makes sense.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see, another question here. If you were aware of any previous studies that have sought to estimate the impact of access to new types of energy in northern countries. So historical analysis looking at the impact of historical energy transitions on women's fertility.
Yes, there is one paper that I am aware of that looked at the electricity transition in the US in the 20th century, I think. Because the US has had a very rapid electrification, because there was a lot of campaign around electrification and a lot of advertisement in a way. And and there was this study looking historically at the electricity transition in the US, and they also found that the effect of fertility on fertility was negative. So the effect of electrification on fertility was also negative. Apart from that, I'm not aware of more historical research, but that would be very, very interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Because there may be different mechanisms going on in low-income countries or in rich countries in the past.
Right. Okay, so maybe on that thought of different mechanisms, another question is whether you have information on the devices used, and I think that means the appliances that are used as a result of energy access, and whether you included that in your analysis.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the DHS doesn't allow to systematically have this information. So it means that we cannot know whether a woman uses, for example, improved cook stove with firewood. Because in some cases you can use a stove that is more efficient than a traditional stove. So you would use still firewood, so that would be your fuel, and I would count this as a woman using not using modern cooking fuel, while she may have a better energy service than someone not having access to such improved cook stoves. So I don't have this information in all DHS, so I could not take this into account. But I think with I think it would be possible to look into this at the country level, because the DHS in some countries has this information. So it would be possible to investigate this as a more fine scale.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, moving on to our next question. Electricity access and clean cooking have been shown to have a positive impact on birth outcomes. And I imagine this couldn't be separated from the data, but perhaps worth commenting on, right? So I think that's reducing child mortality, improving birth outcomes as a result of electricity access and clean cooking.
Yes, yes, definitely. So access to electricity, but also I think modern cooking fuel is definitely improves the living condition, reduces indoor pollution. So this has an impact on child mortality. And this is something I wanted to do in the future, because I want to study the effect of access, to have more effect of having access to modern energy on population growth. And in that case, I would need to take both into account. So there is really like a dual dynamic. So you have electricity that improves reproductive choice and leads to lower fertility. And at the same time, you also reduce child mortality. So that would have two counteracting effects. And yeah, another aspect of this question is that there's also a lot of research showing that less child mortality also leads to fertility decline. So in that case, you would have like electricity would decrease fertility, not only by improving reproductive choice, but also by reducing child mortality.
Thank you. Someone raised the question of decomposing rural versus urban, which maybe is relevant to what you were just talking about. So would you like to comment on that?
Yes, this is something I would like to do in the future. Here we only took the difference in rural and urban areas by including the percentage of urban household in the region. But yeah, this may be very interesting to split the data set into urban and rural, and to look at this relationship. And other studies have done that. I think well, it's York Spitzer. He made a study in 2000, some years ago, I don't remember, and they splitted the data set. And I think they showed that the effect of electrification on fertility in urban area was positive, while it was negative in rural area in Côte d'Ivoire. So there also might be different dynamics if you look separately into this too. Yeah, but I haven't done this so far.
Okay. And I will say we're getting lots of good questions and suggestions in both the Q&A and the chat, and I'm hoping
Nice.
Stephanie's going to download it all for you. So suggestions of looking at religion and placebo test. But given that we're down to 5 minutes, I want to take you back to your initial explanation of methods and data, because there have been a few questions about the structure of your data set.
Yeah.
So could you go back over how many countries you've included and how many years, and at what level do you have fixed effects?
Okay, so I can summarize that. So how many countries? So the data set covers 43 countries, and it's a lot of, most of them are in sub-Saharan Africa, where population is quite high already. And there's also India and Pakistan, so this results in a quite high share of the world population. And then you asked about how many years it covers, right? So the data set, it covers from the years from 1990 to 2015. The thing is, it's not a balanced data set, because it was not possible. There is not enough DHS data to get a balanced data set, so it's imbalanced, and we try to run a robustness check to see if that doesn't affect our result, and it doesn't. But yeah, and was there something else?
Fixed effects, or is it country level or
Fixed
region
effects.
level?
Yeah, they are the region level.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. That's a nice asset from this data set, is that often DHS study operate at the country level, but in fact, since they are representative at the subnational level, it's possible to run an analysis at the subnational level, and this gives more heterogeneity to the data sets.
So the fixed effects would be at the highest level, jurisdictional level, like provinces or states.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah. And hopefully the data sets can be reproduced by anyone, for people to be able to look into their own relationships and at the subnational level. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a couple more minutes. I'll see if I can squeeze in a few more questions because they keep coming. Did you find any information on secondary fuel for cooking among your data sets?
Secondary fuel. No, I don't have a secondary fuel. And yeah, this might be also, so the question that is asked during the interview is, what is your main cooking fuel? And it's not asked, what's your second one? So we assume that's the main cooking fuel is the one the woman uses the most. But indeed, she may still uses traditional wood for some occasion, if she uses modern cooking fuel on a daily basis, for example. So no, I don't have access to such data. Again, I think at the finer level, it's possible to really look into more detail into the effect of, for example, secondary fuels.
Okay, and then maybe the last question I'll squeeze in, whether you've thought about a placebo test, some other outcome that you wouldn't expect to be affected, maybe something sanitation related. So any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure what a placebo test. So when I think of placebo, I think of RCTs, but I'm not sure if that's what is asked here. Yeah.
And that question came from Pam, who should now be able to unmute herself and clarify if you'd like to, Pam.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I can think of lots of other potential explanations for the results that you're getting. And so a placebo is a different outcome that you run the same model with. And if you see, the same result, then that would give you pause in terms of thinking about how, you know, if the result that you have is really real, or if it's just sort of, you know, electricity access as a proxy for economic growth or better access to healthcare or some of these other sort of broad conceptual things. So I think in order for your results to be most robust, you might want to think about doing something like that. And I think Subrendu will have, I think he's writing things in the Q&A or the chat. He'll have lots of ideas.
Yeah, no, that's really there's often this question of whether our results are not driven by like more higher level, let's say, economic development. And of course, we cannot rule this out. We can only, what we tried is to look for additional variables that would be a proxy for the level of economic development, like the percentage of people working in agriculture, or the public spending per capita. But yeah, I've never heard of the placebo test, and this sounds quite interesting to as a robustness check. So if you
there it is for everyone, so you can follow up with Camille. As I always say, if we were in person, you'd be hearing a big round of applause now. This has been great. I appreciate your very clear talk and answers to all of these questions. In the last minute, I just want to thank everyone again for joining this series of seminars that WinEED and SETI collaborated on to talk about the intersection between gender analysis and energy. We've been really happy with the turnout and the discussion we've had. As many of you know, all of the collaboratives, including WinEED, are undergoing some structural change now. But we certainly hope to continue with something similar to this, perhaps looking at the intersection of gender analysis and other domains of EFD research. So keep an eye out for emails from us and new seminars coming up in the new year. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.